Hi there, everybody. This is Wendy Hernandez, and welcome back for another episode of the Family Law Insider podcast. I'm really thrilled to bring you this guest. Her name is Jennifer Turrell, and Jen, she's a rock star, and maybe she'll tell you about that a little bit. But the thing that really impresses me about Jen is the fact that she's the mother of two beautiful daughters. Their names are Tallulah and Myffanwy. And they're awesome. That's the way she describes them. I'm sure she has a lot of other adjectives to describe them, but they both have autism. And through her encounters with autism through her daughters, Jennifer was inspired to form an organization called Able Interventions with Dr. Kristen Byra, and she provides families with autism data, solutions, and support. Jen is also the author of a book. It's called Help, My Child Has Autism, A Parent's Guide to Start, Fund, and Maintain an Evidence-Based Intervention. And today she's talking to us about how to get help for your child's autism. So welcome, Jen, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Wendy, for having me. I appreciate it.
So you're welcome. So Jen, can you tell me where your journey with autism began and when?
Sure. My oldest daughter, Tallulah, she was diagnosed in March of 2010, but we really started noticing things changing with her in January of 2009, which is pretty much exactly the same time we discovered I was pregnant with our youngest child. I had really difficult pregnancies for both children. I had hyperemesis gravidorum, which is a condition where you vomit extremely. I was on IV fluids most of the pregnancy because I couldn't keep any volume of fluid down. I was on Zofran and Phenergan, which are anti-nausea drugs usually used for chemotherapy, just because pretty much every time I stood up, I would vomit. So they were both really difficult pregnancies, and Tallulah, during the second pregnancy, she started really withdrawing, and we were losing eye contact. She started just saying less and less. She just seemed to really kind of go into her own world a little. And at the time, our pediatrician and friends of ours said, well, it's because you're sick. You know, she sees her mom in the state. You know, I had to lie down a lot. I was on bed rest for most of the second pregnancy. And it was definitely really hard on her and hard on both of us. But we kept being told that, oh, as soon as the baby's here, it'll get better, things will get better. So even though we noticed things were kind of going strange with her and we talked to people about it, we didn't, you know, we wanted to believe everything was going to be fine. So when the pediatrician said that it would be okay, we kind of went along with that. But when my second child was born, that was when we really saw the huge change in her. The crying upset her so much. She would put her hands over her ears and just scream and scream whenever the baby cried. And it was the first time we ever saw her get very violent, too. Was her reaction to the baby was just sort of so extreme in being upset that then we got really worried, and we did go to more specialists, and she'd lost a lot of her speech by then.
How old was she? How old was she at that time, Jen?
The kids were about 2.5 years apart, so she was about 2.5 when Myffy was born, and then. Well, it's a little bit more. She's born in May, Myffy's born in September. So Tallulah was diagnosed in March, which was just a couple months before she turned 3. So from September through March was really when we saw some dramatic changes in her. But once we got the diagnosis, looking back, we looked back at old videos and stuff, and we realized that there were always a few things that had we known what to look for, we might have recognized earlier. Even in her crib, she always had this really interesting sort of stiff-muscled, she'd make this fist, and whenever she was happy and excited, and we called it the baby motorcycle, because she'd kind of sit in her crib and ride her motorcycle and giggle and smile. And, later on that turned into sort of this, she does a tight-fisted flap, this sort of the excited flapping motion that she does. And she also had a lot of sort of strange visual things where she'd turn her head and look out of the corner of her eye and run at things really quickly. And we did have a period with a lot of screaming as well. We discovered partway through that a lot of these sort of extreme behaviors that she started having were a reaction to pain. She has a second diagnosis of eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a very painful white blood cell disorder. But because of her autism, when we were taking to her doctors at first, for about the first year after the autism diagnosis, everything just got blamed on autism. But I felt there was something more. So I mean, that's an important lesson I want any parent of an autistic child to know, especially if you have a nonverbal child, is a lot of times there are other underlying medical conditions that can be hidden because of autism. So sometimes she would scream for just hours and hours on
Oh,
end,
wow.
and it was heart-rending and horrifying. And we did discover that she was in pain, and she was trying to tell us. And so once we had her second diagnosis, and she did have to be put on a G-tube because she's extremely allergic to most foods. Most of that disappeared. You know, the real extreme behaviors where she would hit her head as well on things, and bite herself and do things that hurt her.
Yeah.
And once that other diagnosis was taken care of and she wasn't in pain anymore, a lot of that disappeared, which was such a relief. She's come so far since then. But right when we were getting her diagnosed with eosinophilic esophagitis, her little sister started showing early signs of regressive autism as well.
Oh, wow.
Luckily, we knew exactly what to look for by then, so
Yeah.
we started her right into therapy. It did take a little while to get a diagnosis for her because the way autism is diagnosed is, you have to fit so many categories. There's no blood test or anything. It's just people observing behaviors, and then you get the diagnosis based on these different categories of behaviors. So because we recognized the early behaviors like losing eye contact and losing speech, and she was still nursing at the time, and she would want to nurse and try to nurse me, but then she'd also try to push me away.
Yeah.
So she'd get so frustrated. But I was really glad that we caught it so early with her. We started her in ABA therapy at 16 months old, whereas Tallulah, we had that whole 17 months of regression before we got the diagnosis of just feeling really confused. At one point we thought she was going deaf possibly because she wouldn't respond to her name anymore. It was really, really scary time. But
That is, I mean, it just scares me listening to it, and I don't know, it does something to my heart just listening to what you went through and that what your daughters went through. So, I hope that you can help other parents who might be going through the same thing, and I'm sure that you are by your book and your website and this interview.
I hope so too. One of the hardest things for us is we were living really remotely at the time. We were on a ranch that's it's about an hour's drive out of Flagstaff, which is a pretty small town. It's about 3 hours from Phoenix, which is where we had to go for a lot of our appointments, especially when we first started. We did go to the autism center there. But part of what I wanted to do with the book was help other families who don't have an autism center that you can go to and just give them your insurance card and they walk you through everything. Because we didn't have that. We got the diagnosis and we were basically told she may never talk, she may never be interested in, in significant relationships like that. That may not be important to her. And I had been reading a lot online, so I did ask about ABA therapy, but at the time it wasn't easily accessible in Flagstaff. So I kind of felt like we were just sent home with, we were put onto AZIP, which offers, occupational therapy and speech therapy. But we had 2 days of just kind of, being stunned and wondering what this meant for our lives before we, then I was like, well, we have to do everything we possibly can for her. So we started researching, got online, started talking to people, finding people whose kids had made a lot of progress and who did either learn to speak or at least communicate with devices, that kind of thing, and see what they did, what all of the studies showed were the best therapies and the best uses of our money, especially because as a small business, we work on a family ranch. We don't have group employment insurance, so we have just individual policy. And in Arizona, Stevens Law exists, which is fantastic. It does require that medically necessary autism therapies are paid for by insurance, but only employer-provided insurance. So small policies like ours actually had an autism exclusion, which meant nothing related to autism could even go towards our high deductible.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that was pretty devastating when we found that out.
That's terrifying. So
yeah.
So I want to talk about that. I have a couple of questions because I don't know anything about autism except, what you're telling me here and just, just hearing about it. So first, you've referred a couple of times to ABA therapy. What does that mean?
It's applied behavior analysis, which, it has 30 years of studies and data behind it. It's kind of been the main scientific practice now that is covered by insurance in a lot of states that have insurance mandates. It does now mandate that they cover these early intensive behavioral intervention programs, which are the ones that have been shown to most consistently have the most progress for kids. And I can see in both of our kids are very, very different. Tallulah has these medical conditions, which Myffanwy doesn't. And Tallulah's, I think from the start, was a more severe case. But when Myffanwy started showing the symptoms, it looked very, very similar to us. So starting her so early, every skill that we saw her lose, like every word that she used to say that we couldn't get her to say anymore, we target that word immediately. And we very quickly got her caught back up to where she was in terms of, it's so hard to judge kids and their skills, but you have your basic guidelines for where kids things they should be able to do at different ages. And even though all kids are different and no kids, cookie cutter, you do want kids to be able to, say so many words and imitate things, working towards academic skills eventually, working towards self-help skills, independence skills. So with Myffanwy, it felt like starting her so much younger and where so much less regression had happened, we could really see her progress has been really incredible. I mean, she does go to a public preschool, in a special needs program, and then she also goes to a private preschool where we do have an aide go with her, but for the most part, other parents and a lot of the kids, if they don't see her have a big meltdown, most of them don't realize that Myffanwy has autism. I mean, which the point isn't to hide it or anything, it's just we want her to be as independent as possible for both the kids. We want them, to be able to do as much for themselves as they can. So that's what APA works on it. Sorry.
Thank you. No, that helps a lot. And that raises another question for me, Jen. So with autism, is it something that a child has in degrees? Are there different degrees of autism, or is it you have it or you don't?
They call it the autism spectrum disorder. So there's definitely a wide range. The recent version of the DSM-5, which is like the diagnostic, I'm embarrassed, I don't know what the S is for, the diagnostic manual that doctors use. They used to separate out Asperger's syndrome and PPD, or it's pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, was another one, and then you could have severe autism. They've kind of just made it into one spectrum disorder now, with a collection of symptoms that is really so wide-ranging that you can meet two people on the autism spectrum, and they can seem to have so few things in common that I think it can be confusing for people. What I think a lot of people think of as the more sort of scary autism is, being nonverbal and not being able to be independent, having few self-help life skills, and not being able to communicate well.
Okay.
So for us, with young children, really not knowing what their development would be like, and having one who Tallulah pretty much lost all language during her regression. It got down to where she said very few things, and the few things that she did say sounded very odd. To me, it sounded like someone who couldn't hear very well. That's why we kind of went down checking her hearing and audiology and audio processing for quite a while, because I thought, my husband and I are both musicians, and early on we took the kids we were still playing some festivals back then, and we had special ear protection made for her, but I just had this horror that maybe I damaged her hearing, maybe that was what it was. But that early period, it just felt like we kept grasping onto these different things, like could it be this or could it be that, and it was just so hard to know. And having girls often display symptoms a bit differently than boys. So the fact that autism is very skewed to males, it's I think it's about 5 times as many boys as girls, and especially having 2 girls is a bit rare. The siblings are much more likely to have it, with the genetic links, but it just took so long to recognize it with Tallulah, and with Myffanwy catching it so much earlier and building the skills from the start has really made a huge difference for her.
That's awesome that you were able to catch it so early, and that you've found your own way to help your daughters, and now you're helping other people. So for the parent out there who is listening to this and is worried, and maybe is some of the stuff that you're saying sounds familiar, Where do they go first to have the child checked? Do they just go to a pediatrician? Do they go to a specialist? What do you suggest?
Well, I would say starting with a pediatrician, because often for the specialist you need a reference to be referred by your pediatrician. So that was what we did. And even though I was a little frustrated because our pediatrician really didn't recognize it and really did try to assure us, we did end up getting the referral first for the audiologist. And the audiologist, because she sees all the kids going into AZIP, because they always test the hearing first to make sure it's not deafness before they go to developmental delays, she was actually the first person who said the word autism to me, because we couldn't get Tallulah to follow any directions in, even for young children, it helps if they can, raise the hand on the left, raise the hand on the left, right, if they can respond to where the sound's coming from. For babies, and what they did for Tallulah was just try to have a sudden sound and see if she turns her head, And then we did the one where they do the sonar and, it bounces the signals back and they can see what the inside of the ear looks like is the organ healthy. So no one had said that word to us until we went to the audiologist, and that was when we were starting with AZIP, because by then her speech was considered delayed because she was almost 3 and used to have speech and no longer did. So the pediatrician should send you to the early intervention program and possibly a developmental pediatrician. We don't have one in Flagstaff, so we ended up going to a diagnosing psychologist eventually. We saw the neurologist at St. John's in Phoenix, St. Joseph's in Phoenix, because we were worried. My husband and I both had epilepsy in our family. We don't have it ourselves. I have an uncle and he had a cousin. So to check for seizure activity, which is often a comorbidity with autism. Okay. So really we ended up taking her to a lot of specialists before we ended up with a full diagnosis, which I do think it's good to explore all the possibilities, because sometimes kids who have seizures, they can have symptoms that look like autism, and then when you treat the seizures, those symptoms lessen or go away. There are a few possibilities where it could be something else. Okay. For my kids, it definitely was autism.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, okay, and along with that, because it sounds like in the beginning, and I don't know if it's still this way for you, but the days were filled with tons of doctor's appointments and specialist appointments, and and how does that play into the finances? Because how, as you mentioned earlier, that under your insurance plan, that this was an exclusion. So, do you have suggestions for a parent who is going on this journey, in terms of checking with insurance and looking at other resources if they need them?
Yes, and that was something I really wanted to address in the book, because other families we've met, when we explain kind of the process we've gone through with getting the diagnosis first and then setting up an early intensive in-home therapy program, if families feel like they can't pay for it, they aren't going to explore all the options. So we definitely had those issues early on, especially when I called their insurance and they said, nope, we don't cover anything. I was completely devastated, because I'd looked up Stephen's Law and I read it and I thought, oh, fantastic, the first $50,000 every year, that's the cap in Arizona. But I thought $50,000, that could get us so much therapy, we can go so far. So I was devastated when I found out we couldn't get that. We did go ahead and start private paying some ABA therapy just because I was so desperate to get her started before 3. But I immediately started researching and seeing what could be done. So the way that we've done it, we've used a couple of different sources of funding, and I go over all of this in our book. The whole resource section, half the book is a resource section with state-by-state resources, a list for all of the insurance mandates, all of the links for the different state-by-state early intervention programs, and then all the Medicaid-funded resources, all of the agencies, because that's what we ended up having to do for a good part of it, is we go through the Arizona Department of Economic Security. Both of my kids with their disability qualified first for AZIP, which is the Arizona Early Intervention Program. And then when you turn 3, they aged out of that and got into ALTEX, which is the Arizona Long-Term Care Services. And autism is a condition that's considered lifelong and long-term. So if their disability, when you go through the medical exams and the medical interviews, if it's determined that their level of need is high enough to qualify, then a lot of services can be paid through ALTEX. So until my kids were late potty training, We got diapers through them. My daughter's tube feeding equipment, all of her tube feeding stuff. So she qualifies doubly because that's a lifelong medical condition as well. And then also we get respite services, which have been a lifesaver for me and my husband. And then we also get habilitation services. And we have used our habilitation services for our ABA therapy. They have something called HAB-M, which is habilitation at the master's or higher level. So you can have a doctor like Dr. Byra, a BCBA, oversee your program, train people to do the one-on-one HAB work in home. And it's not always used that way, but that's how we've been able to put this program together without insurance and with using some private pay, but minimal. You know, once we learned how to work all these different programs together, and then also the school system. Both of my kids at 3 started the preschool program, the special needs preschool program in the school district. So we had the school district do a PO with our BCBA, which is the Board Certified Behavior Analyst. Sorry, I just threw that out there without explaining.
That's okay. And what's a PO?
Oh, a purchase order. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
So, because we explained how we have this really intense, great program at home that we've built, and you know we've spent our own money. We're using the Medicaid dollars to do this, and we wanted to expand it into the school for the kids. We wanted wraparound services so that everywhere they went, everyone was really intensely working on these specific goals, and there was continuity across different environments for them. So we actually had our our home program tutors, most of whom are graduate students working towards their own behavioral analyst certification. They go to school with the kids as well and are one-on-one aides to help them. For my kids, they do really well with one-on-one instruction because they've been having it for so long, but they have a really difficult time sitting in a classroom, attending to a teacher, and then interacting with all the kids around them. So they still need a lot of help. And the goal is always independence. The goal is to get them to where they can hang out with a group of kids and interact and have it go well without, you know, adult help and supervision. And we've even gone so far as to have a little play group where a couple of typical peers will get pulled to participate in little games. And I think it's great both for the peers who are learning more about kids with differences, and then for my daughter, she ended up developing this really close friendship with 2 of the girls who did this with her all year long. And you know, they come over to our house still and play, and which is, you know, one of the things for parents of autistic kids is, can the kid make friends? Will they have other kids who are understanding and who, you know, won't mind that they talk a little different and do things a little differently? So
that's awesome.
It's been really great.
That's awesome. And so Jen, with all the treatments and the rehabilitation that you guys are going through with your daughters, do you have any idea how long all of this will continue? Is it going to be a lifelong thing for them? You know, or can you even say at this point?
Well, the early intensive portion, you know, you want to start it as early as possible, and it usually goes at least up until school starts, and then there's often a year or 2 of transition where it still is pretty intense, but it lessens. As time goes on, the school district takes over more and more of it. The habilitation program here in Arizona, older kids often still will get a few hours of habilitation different days throughout the week to help in community activities and, you know, learning things that aren't academic that you still need to do, independent, self-help, things like that. But yes, as the kids get into full days of school, it definitely lessens the home program and the outside therapies. My kids also do speech and OT outside of school, you know, through their DDD program, which is the Department of Developmental Disabilities. You know, that's how we fund everything from Altex. It's very confusing. That's why I kind of made a flow chart in the book of how the Medicaid dollars flow. And then they also get speech and OT and ABA in school as well. So I kind of think the more continuity you have between a home program and a school program and your community program, the better. But it does take a lot of coordinating.
It sounds like it, and that's, you know, for anybody out there who's listening who feels overwhelmed and confused, I think, like, you know, along with going to see the doctor, the first step, I'm really pushing Jen's book because, you know, I've read the reviews on Amazon, and she really breaks it down and makes it easy to understand. So please, if you're listening to this and you think you need help, go get the book. Jen, Jen and I were talking before this broadcast, and she told me that there was another important piece for her that she just got put into place like in January of this year, and I really wanted to throw it out there since this is a Family Law Insider podcast, because I don't know if you covered it in the book, but I just want to highlight it now, Jen, that part about the special needs trusts and how other things could be impacted if you don't have that.
Yeah. It wasn't one of the first things that occurred to me. My husband and I did set up a will when my daughter was first born, and we bought just a regular term life insurance on each of us. But our thoughts at that point were just, if something happens to us when our kids are little, they'd need help up through high school. You know, they'd need a guardian, they'd need money to pay for things up through high school. We weren't thinking of the rest of their lives, because you don't when you don't know your child has a disability. Once you do know your child has a disability, I still didn't think of it immediately because we're so wrapped up in all the therapies and appointments daily, but I went to a conference, and it was actually a conference that Dr. Byra and I presented at, and I met this man named Bart Stevens from Phoenix who did a talk on special needs trusts and protecting your family for the future. And I didn't know this, but there is a $2,000 asset cap for Medicaid recipients, and if your child inherits directly into their name, anything over $2,000, they can lose their Medicaid eligibility. It can take years to get it back, even if you spend down the inheritance. And sometimes, if there's enough inheritance, you have to pay back Medicaid for past services.
Yeah.
So it's really, really important to put together a special needs trust. We did it with Bart Stevens, as I met him at the conference. I came down to Phoenix. You know, we brought him our past will and everything that we had. We went through all of our assets and figured out as best as we could. It's hard to judge what a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old will need for the rest of their lives.
Right.
You know, so if something happened to me right now, how much money would need to be in this trust for my children? That's a really hard thing to think about. For the time being, you know, we looked at what we have that could be liquidated, and we also looked at how much life insurance we should buy. But the main thing is also, say, grandparents or aunts and uncles, if they want to do something nice for your child and leave them something, even a car could put them over the limit.
Wow.
So you set up a special needs trust, which is for your child. They're the beneficiary. Anything that could go to them, it just gets caught by the special needs trust and held there. People like Bart, there are definitely other specialists, I'm sure, around the country who specialize in special need law, but they know how to set it up so that they can receive things into this trust, and that can be for their benefit. They have to be used in certain ways so they don't lose like their Social Security and special needs Medicaid eligibility. But this can really protect them and make it so that they have resources for things that they need in the future. Especially if at some point there's vocational training, maybe even college. Who knows what a young child will be capable of, 20 years from now. So
Right.
Maybe they want to live in a different sort of residential facility or have their own place eventually with a helper, or maybe they'll even get to full independence, at which time Bart assured us that you can always dissolve a trust and make it into like a college fund trust if your child needs that instead. But we finally did it in January. We signed all the paperwork, and it just really took such a load off of my shoulders, because I do worry a lot, what would happen to my kids without me and my husband if something were to happen to both of us. So there's a lot of work on who you want to be your guardian. You make a long list of guardians because you're looking at your child's whole lifetime, so it's possible it would pass from one person to another.
Yes.
Trustees for financial stuff and medical decisions, all those things. And it actually was great it brought my family together talking about these things too, like who would do what, and it was really good to think about.
These are really great conversations to have that I don't think people who aren't dealing with these challenges would normally have. So not only does it open up communication, but I think it probably brings you all closer. You get on the same page about what you want for your children's future.
A lot of times you don't have those kind of discussions until it's like, an elderly parent's final years, if they can't stay in their own home, like who does what, those sorts of things. So it's I think it's good to figure it out before it's needed.
Yes.
And hopefully, I kind of feel like now that we've done it, we won't need it. I felt like as long as we hadn't done it, I was afraid we might need it. Now I feel like, okay, it's there, but I think we won't ever need it. I hope. Not for many years anyway.
Yeah, that's great, Jen, and I think that is a great point to end on. And again, I just encourage anybody out there listening to get Jen's book if you're just starting this journey, or if you're in the middle of it and still feeling confused and overwhelmed. And Jen, so I would love for you to tell people how they can find you and how they can find the book, and also I just if you could just tell people what else you do, because I think the music thing is really interesting, and if people want to check out your music, which I think is really great, let them know how they can do that.
Okay, sure. The book is on Amazon. It's in Kindle right now, so you can search my name, Jennifer Turrell, which is Turrell, or if you look up "Help My Child Has Autism," it should come up as well. Our website is Able Intervention, spelled ABLE. That stands for Applied. I'm sorry, Analysis of Behavior, Learning, and Education. I don't say the whole thing that often, but we really wanted to focus on the ability, not the disability. And we have the book listed there as well with some other resources. We have a workbook you can print out. The workbook is in the book, but if you want to print it out instead of having it on Kindle, you can print it out at our website, and all the resources are there. We include a lot of information about, we had to hire in-home staff ourselves. We find the graduate students, we interview them, we do all of that. So I included questions for interviews, sample employment contracts, just all kinds of stuff that if you don't have an autism center to help you and you want to do this kind of program, will help you. For our music, my husband and I have a website called jenandstew.com, spelled S-T-E-W. He's a Stewart with a W, so jenandstew.com. I also have our family blog on that website. And we actually took our kids to one more music festival in May, which was super fun. We hadn't played in a long time because we've been really focused on the autism stuff, but It was fun to get invited to a festival again and take the kids and play. They got to come to the daytime shows and see their dad drum and everything. So
that's so cool. That's cool. I love their music, and I love actually the blogs on the Able website, because I think they really do give people hope, and I think that's what your message is about, is giving people hope and encouragement. So Thank you so much for joining me. You gave a lot of really great info, and I will have all the links to Jen's website and the book on the show notes of this podcast when the audio version is released. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of the Family Law Insider podcast. And I will throw in that we do special needs trust here at Hernandez Family Law. So if you're in Arizona and you need help with this, contact us.
Great.
And thank you. And until next time, remember, we're on your side when it matters most. Thank you.